Welcome back from the break. We'll continue now with Module 5, Image and Application Management. Wrap up with Module 6, Monitor and Optimize Azure Virtual Desktop. Let's start with Module 5. So we're in Module 5 now. You envision what you want to achieve with your VM. You are just using the minimum services you need to achieve your goal. You added the applications, you removed the ones you didn't want. So you created your golden image for your deployments. You can replicate that, and you can create identical VMs to achieve that purpose. You can use tools like Manage Images for that. We'll cover the VM creation process. We will cover Share Image Gallery and MSIX application attach. So let's see how you create a Manage VM image. You will first create a VM, and based off that, you will create a generalized image. The VM will include the OS disks, and the disks will be VHDs stored as managed disks. Before creating a new VM, you will need to create a Manage VM image to use as a source image. You'll need to grant permissions to the users who need to have access to deploy that. You have two options to create your VM. You can go to the portal and provision your VM in Azure, or you can do that on premises using Hyper-V and provision that from there. So let's go for a little demo. All right, I just have a virtual machine that happens to be the exact match of what I want for my deployments. I have my Windows 10 Enterprise for virtual desktops, and it has all of the services the way I want it. So what I need to do now is to capture the image. So first, what I need to do is to go to Connect to the box, and from inside of the box, what we will do is to use a command, sysprep command, to generalize the image for later deployments. That will remove all of the personalizations you have for this virtual machine. Also the identifiers. So you can reuse that and it will regenerate that. So I'll connect to that. There it is. Now that I'm connected, I will go to CMD. And I'll go to the System folder. Inside there, you have the sysprep folder. And I can run sysprep. Make sure you are using administrator credentials. Now that I'm in, I will generalize my image, and since it will remove all of the personalizations and also the identifiers of the VM, it makes sense to not restart the VM again. So maybe you want to remove the VM at the end. I will just shut down the VM. So generalize and shut down. Hit OK here, and it will take some time to prep this work. All right, it is done with that, so I cannot connect from here, even though it might look that it is on the virtual machine because it was shut down from the OS. It is not visible here that is stopped, but it's actually like that. So I'll stop the VM and I will capture the image. So we will capture the image, hitting the capture button. Remember, it needs to be stopped. So I'm selecting the resource group. And if I want to share that to an existing gallery, we'll cover that later. So we'll leave that for later. So for now, no capture, only a manage image. I can automatically delete the virtual machine after creating the image. Normally you want to have that deleted because after that you are removing all of the personalizations and then you're creating new virtual machines based off that. So maybe it makes sense to remove that. In this time, I won't be doing that. For zone resiliency, you can add resiliency to the VM if your region supports that. I won't be doing that. So the next thing I need to do is to add my tags to it. I'll give it environment, production, and you can see I can reuse the tags I already specified. It is important you always use tags to quickly find your resources. So I hit review and create. Create. It will take some time to grab the information and store that in a way we can actually reuse that. So let's wait for it. So let's go to the resource. And there you have it. That is your image from where you can create virtual machines from. So we created the image. And remember, you can create based off a particular image more than one VM. If you want to do that concurrently, like 20 at a time, it is fine. But remember, it's coming from a single point. Maybe you want to count all the time one image every 20 concurrent VM deployments. So that concludes our demo. All right, now you saw how you capture the image. Now we will create a VM based off this very image we just created. So let's do that. You need to find your images. So you go to Images, under Services, and you'll find that again. Once you click on that, you can create a VM out of this image. I'll hit a plus sign here, and I'll need to select the destination for the virtual machine now. I'll leave the defaults here with my subscription and resource group. I'll give the virtual machine a name. Let's call it Workstation 1. And depending on the region you are in, you'll have the option to select availability zones for the destination VM or availability sets. You always have the option for availability set, but availability zone will be depending on your region, particular region. In this case, I'm not selecting any redundancy. I'm using the image you just saw, and I will use a size of D type. So I'll go for all sizes, and I can narrow it down to this much CPUs, this much memory. In this case, I have that right in front of me, so I'll select that from here. That is offering me all of the different sizes available in these regions. So I will select this one, the SP3. I will select a local administrator and the password. So it will create a VM like if I'm creating one from scratch. Remember, we just pre-configure our disk and it will have all of the personalizations we configured for it. Normally you are deploying a virtual machine you created based off an image in Azure Virtual Desktop for a session host, okay? In this case, we're just deploying a virtual machine as such by itself. I won't select any rules here. I'll select that I have my Windows client license. I will confirm that I have that. And that's it. You see, you always have that basic tab, the tags, and the review and create. In the middle, you have the option to select the proper type of disk, the encryption options, networking, where you're going to be sending that to which particular subnet, I'm not using any public IP for this. I won't deploy any NSGs. Remember, we covered this part already. So I'll leave that as it is in the workstations subnet in this virtual network. For management, in this case, I will disable the boot diagnostic. It is recommended you can easily track the status of the VM by checking on even the screen of the VM in a JPG format. In this case, I'm not touching any of that, but you see you can enable auto shutdown automation. You can connect that to site recovery, even configure the guest OS update. In this case, since it is a session host for us, remember we are handling the patching in a centralized manner. Every once in a while, we will patch the golden image instead. So in this case, I'll leave that with the thoughts. I don't care too much about it for the demo. Let's review and create and wait for the deployment. We just deployed our first image to a VM. You need to modify the host image first, right? So you have your end result ready. You can do that by using group policies and send them to a build, maybe OU. You can do that also by running regadd command, like you see on the screen. Remember the option we mentioned about no updates from the nodes? Instead of running that updates from the nodes, having that done on the golden image once in a while, and then you are replicating that to the nodes, and you are redeploying the nodes without them talking straight up to Windows Update. This is how you do that. Either by group policy or regadd, you can run this command with no update, and it will do that for you. You need to consider many other different things. Here we have another example, like special roaming override allowed. If you're using that option, you can specify your own customized settings for that layout. Also, you can configure your enable time zone redirection from your master image, allowing that to the terminal services. So after you've done that, you can configure, instead of just a single image for you to deploy later on your VMs from, you can have your image gallery instead. The image gallery will allow you to have different versions of the same image. Based off definitions, it will be your repository. So first you have the share image gallery, that repository. Then you need to specify an image source. It can be an existing VM you already have that you already generalized or specialized, a managed image, a snapshot, or even a VHT. After you selected your image source, you will create your image definition. That image definition will contain the type of image, including if that is Windows or Linux, release notes, minimum and maximum memory recommended, and also the attributes specifying the SKU for that image definition. Then you have the last bits where you are distinguishing one from the other on the versions. We call that image version. You can have multiple versions per image. So you use the image version to create a VM. Normally you're using the latest one. And here you have different image definitions with different versions. You can have one version only, or you can have more than one. Like you see image definition, it has 6. Instead of deploying that again, based off a different image, you can refer to the same image, but it will always pick up the latest version. That will simplify your deployments. You can also come back anytime you want to the prior one. If you want to have a deployment where you're sending that image to more than 20 different VMs concurrently, remember, you might want to have a different replica. If you're enabling replicas, you'll need to wait for the replica to actually be replicated. If that is cross regions, it might take longer. So let's see those considerations in perspective. So you have share image scaling, and you need to specify how many replicas you need to accommodate for how much VMs you want to deploy at the same time. Every replica can hold up to 20 different deployments. It is important in terms of performance, reliability, and consistent that you are specifying how many replicas you need to achieve the goal you want to meet. In this case, you need 100 different VMs. So you will need to divide that by 20, and you're getting 5 replicas needed for concurrency. So you will specify how many replicas you need on each one of the target regions based on the scale that every region needs. If you're deploying a virtual machine scale set based off a shared image, you can deploy up to 1,000 VM instances as a limit for the virtual machine scale set, and you will need to go down to 600 on the virtual machine scale set if you're using your custom image. In the event that your shared image is your custom image, you will normally have this 600 for a virtual machine scale set. Remember, we are deploying session host and session host pools. So this is another technology, virtual machine scale set. If you are doing that, based off that, these are your limits. So let's go for a little demo on how you interact with the shared image gallery. All right, let's create a shared image gallery. So I'm going for the search bar, and I will look for shared image gallery. I will create my first one. Create. I need to specify the resource script and a name. Let's call it my gallery. I'll leave that in ECUS. I can specify my description, and I will need to specify my tags. Let's use environment, production, review and create, and let's wait for the deployment. So we have our shared image gallery created. So let's go to the resource, and I will add an image definition. I need to specify a definition name. So let's call that my definition. You need to specify the Windows operating system if that is the case, or Linux. The VM generation, we'll leave that as generation 1. The operating system state, it can be either generalized or specialized. Remember, the generalized was the image we did using the sysprep that will get an out-of-box experience. It will remove all of the personalizations. You don't need to do that for specialized. It will preserve the users that has access to the image. It will preserve the name of the image. Maybe you want to go that path. It will be faster. But for now, we'll leave that as generalized. It has some downsides as well and some considerations, so you might want to double check if specialized it is your thing for your deployments. So for publisher, we'll leave that as my publisher. Same for offer and SKU. You see each one of them, it is a subset of the one prior. Like my SKU is one of the SKUs from the offer and one of the offers from the publisher. In this case, we'll leave that. You will need to be more precise with that, okay? So next thing is to go to the version. The version name, let's leave that as 1.0.0. And I need to specify my source image. I do have one source image I can reuse, so I'll use that. I can define the end of life cycle there, end date for this image version. I won't. It is not mandatory, but you can actually do that. And remember the 20 per replica VMs, 20 VMs you can create based off one replica. So if you want to deploy more than 20, you will need to modify this number. Here's where. You see the disk will be standard HDD, locally redundant. We'll leave that as it is. It is 3 copies, by the way. And we are done. Let's review and create. Create. And we will wait for this to completion. All right, let's go to the resource. Now it finished the creation process. We can see that we have a definition now. It is major 1, minor 0, and patch 0. So that is our definition. So you see the status succeeded. If you're replicating across different regions, it might take longer and you'll need to wait for all of the replicas to actually populate. You can create a virtual machine or a virtual machine skill set from here. We are not doing that. We are assigning now permissions to my gallery. So let's see where we have that. You can go from here, or you can search your share image galleries, open the object, and we will go to the access control. Here, you're assigning roles using the plus sign at the top. You can add a role assignment, or you can check on what permissions you already assigned, checking on the second tab, role assignments. I will add a role, clicking add role assignment. And you need to select the proper role for the gallery. Maybe I want to assign just read access. And I will select my security principal. I'll use the one I was using for the Active Directory demo. So I can use that. It will invite this user since it is a guest, and it will have enough of access to read this gallery. Save that. Remember that if that is outside of your organization, the one receiving that will get an email saying you are invited to use the resource. And after it confirms the access, the Azure Active Directory user will be created on the tenant you are residing now, and it will assign the permissions based on that. So that concludes our demo. So you just saw how easily we can deploy an image and have our applications running. But instead of deploying one by one your applications to your hosts, you might want to go the path of maybe maintaining that using System Center Configuration Manager. There are many ways you can do that. Another way of how you can actually do the same thing is by running some application virtualization, some Citrix layering. There's many ways. This is the best approach because it is adding on top of what you have, like Win32, Windows Presentation Foundation, or if you're using Forms application, you can use the new modern packaging of MSIX application attached. It will deliver the applications in physical and virtual machines. It will containerize all of the dependencies of the application in a way that you can attach that to the profile in every deployment. You don't need to actually have the full installation alongside with that. This MSIX IX is especially made for Azure Virtual Desktop. It will create a separation between the data, the OS, and applications by using containers. You don't need to read packing when delivering the applications dynamically. So it will reduce the time for a user to sign in. Just log in and you will be getting alongside with a user profile the applications to run on top. So here's how it works. First, the client signs you in with a session host. So you're being assigned a virtual machine from the host pool. If you have FS Logic agent configured in the session host, then you're getting your profile from a file share that is attached to the VM in a way that it is undistinguishable from a local profile. Alongside with a profile, you can get your applications from MSIX. You have the option to use OneDrive if you're sharing across different session hosts in a virtualized environment. That can be challenging, especially OneDrive needed to be installed per user session. That is no longer the case, and we have now OneDrive Sync application for Virtual Desktop. If you're using that, it will update automatically for you over the OneDrive you already have, and automatic updates will be available when new versions are available. So you can use OneDrive Sync to accommodate for the OneDrive for business. It will be valid for Windows 10, Windows 7, Windows Server, any supported version of Windows. So that is all I have for this module. See you in the next one. Monitor and optimization of Azure Virtual Desktop. So we'll cover things like Azure Automation, Run as accounts, Logic Apps, and Azure Monitor, and how we can achieve scale in, scale out in our deployment. Scaling session hosts using Azure Automation will be our approach. So you need to know your numbers, right? If you are an architect and you're starting deploying this for a particular type of user, you need to know the behavior the users will take. Like they are coming early in the morning to the job, they are working during working hours and after hours. Normally, they start leaving to their homes. They're going back home and maybe they're leaving stuff behind, like maybe their workstations on. So it is important that you know your numbers, how often people do specific things like shutting the virtual machines down or maybe leaving things behind, so you can properly recognize the behavior and act and bring some efficiencies to that deployment. So here you can easily see people coming up in the morning after a threshold is met, like maybe you're hitting, let's say, we have 9 users there. So you're hitting 9 users, then you're turning on more session hosts. That makes sense, right? You don't want to have them on all the time. If they are allocated, you're paying for it. So you want to keep that to the minimum you need. So at 8 p.m., you have the rush hour. Everyone is working, peak hour. So you need to accommodate for the resources to meet that demand. During the day, you have someone connecting, someone disconnecting. You have some consistent steady state. So after a while, people will be back home off peak, and you're getting an idle condition throughout the night. So you need to plan on how you achieve that. Shut down the VMs you're not using and provide enough resources while they are being used. To achieve that, you can use automation in Azure and a Run as account, both. You create first the automation account that can do a lot of things. One of these will be run an orchestration for you. but you see it has more to it. And you also need to configure the run as account to impersonate that account to the resources you want to modify. You see the run as account will have a service principal and it will be assigned the contributor role. That is the service principal. So after you created the run as account, it will authenticate securely using certificates instead of usernames and passwords. So let's go for a little demo and I'll show you how you accomplish that. Scale out, scale in using run as accounts. So we need to create an automation account. So you can search for it. You see I have under recent services, I was using that already, but I can search for it, automation accounts. That is the first thing. You see I have one created. I'll show you that later. So this automation account, we're creating that from scratch. Create. You need to give it a name. Let's call it automation. It needs to belong to a resource group, a location for the automation account, and this is important. You see, create a run as account. At the same time I'm creating my automation, it will create the security principal for it to interact with the resources on its behalf. So you can do that if you want, or you can choose no here. I'll go for yes, and I'll show you how it works later. You need to assign permissions, but it will do that for you. It will assign the contributor role in the subscription. So we're doing two things. We're creating an automation account alongside with a security principal for it to run against our resources. And the permissions. Create. So you see, it just deployed the automation account, and it's now creating the run as account at the same time as a service principal, and it will assign permissions to it. So let's go to the resource first. You see the automation account can be used to automate the inventory, change tracking, state configuration, desired state configuration, update management, runbooks, and this is what we are interested on. You can use the same automation account for premises environment, and you can see the results on the dashboard for every job you sent to it, as failed, suspended, completed, all of it. And if you want to inspect on each one of them, you have the process automation jobs. You can see the history of them. Let's go for the runbooks. And alongside with the automation account, you're getting different tutorials where you can learn. You can run the automation in Python, you can run the automation in PowerShell, or you can even use graphical runbook, which will be a form of PowerShell, graphical form of PowerShell. Another thing you have, if you go to the bottom here, you have the share resources. The share resources will include schedules for you to run this automation, modules to add to the automation account context. You can add your credentials, your connections, your certificates, even variables, all of them, like if you have a server running somewhere. So let's go for the modules gallery briefly. And you see you have the same type of modules like if you are on your own workstation running PowerShell, you can add those different modules. This will work the exact same way. Let's go for run as accounts. You see in account settings, you have the run as accounts. So we are getting, alongside with the automation account, a run as account. And here it is. This run as account will have a certificate with a thumbprint, an expiration date, and also a service principal. So the combination of the service principal and the thumbprint will be the authorization piece for the Run As account. You don't need to use any username and password. If you go to the runbooks, you can create your own runbook that will run with this automation account. So let's go and review one of the automation accounts I have ready for this demo that will scale out and in our resources based on the session host capacity at the moment. So let's go for automation accounts. And inspect, you see it failed. It is not up yet. So you can see the reports coming out. And for my runbooks, I do have an automation runbook for Azure Virtual Desktop Scale Out or Scale In. Let's inspect the code. So this is a real runbook that will do that for you. You have these remarks here on how you interact with the code, and you can modify that, you can publish it, and hopefully you're running it to maintain your session host environment. So that concludes our demo. You can review the quick starts for the automation runbooks on docs.microsoft.com. So one thing you can do after you have your automation account, you can create a schedule on the automation account, or you can use Azure Logic App for that. So if you want to send parameters as well, you can send them into a webhook. So that is exactly what is being shown here. Let me quickly expand this. You see, create the Azure Logic App and execution schedule. So you have all of what you need. If you expand on the link on the screen, you will need to search for create the Azure Logic App and executions schedule. So after you've done that, you will be getting a Logic App with this content. And from here, you can easily see it is every 15 minutes, it will run this. It will send these commands. You can modify the contents, you can run different schedules, and it will interact with the automation account every 15 minutes or whatever it is appropriate to you. It is based on a timer. You can get information out using Log Analytics Workspace from Azure Virtual Desktop. Especially, you can get diagnostic settings out of the host pools. You need to go to the host pools, expand, and then go to monitoring, then diagnostic settings, and you can select all of these values. It all revolves around the concept of a centralized tool to monitor all of your environment. Azure Monitor will do that for you. You can add on top of that Log Analytics to later on maybe run some queries against the tables you're interested on, like you see agent health status, connection management, all of what you have on the screen. You can do the same thing for your workspace. You go to the workspaces, you expand on your workspace, you go to monitoring, and there you can enable the settings you want one by one. You will need to attach this resource to the workspace. Once it is attached to one workspace, you cannot attach that to any other workspace. The benefit of using workspaces is that they can listen to data coming from Azure or from anywhere else. You just need to have the workspace ID and the address for the workspace, and that's it. It is normally the case that you have your resources deployed already, and you know what you deployed, but over time things might change, and also maybe someone else is deploying at the same time similar things. So to overcome this span of control, we have an advisor running in Azure. You can rely on 5 different categories for Azure to give you some more information about your resources in Azure. It will compare your resources deployment to the standards, and based on that, it will give you those 5 categories of recommendations. For instance, in cost, where you can bring some efficiencies to your organization. Like you have a resource that was first attached to a VM and now the VM is gone, but the resource is still there, like maybe a public IP, you have maybe a disk, you name it, and it is dormant there without being used by anyone, and you're paying for it. You don't want to have that. Cost will tell you you have this resource that is loose. And then you decide whether you want to fix that, like removing the resource or attaching that. So that is cost management. It will also give you recommendations on resources that are underutilized. Like you have, let's say, a full virtual machine skill set or just a VM running at 10% of the CPU time. So what do you want to do with that? Maybe you want to downsize because it will never hit maybe 20%. You can be better off having 1/5 of the VM for the same use case and even having a spare capacity just in case, but that will give you some room to breathe and the cost will go down to 1/5. You can prove also your case because you want to bring that recommendation to the meeting board and you can say, I have this coming from Azure Advisor, from us, from Microsoft, saying this is something you can achieve very easily by doing this very little thing. So that is one thing. Cost management, very important. If you're not certain how much you're paying for your resources, maybe it is your time to shine and show that you can bring your cost down and maybe provide better resources for the rest of the deployments. Another thing we can cover here is security. And security, it is crucial for every organization. And you can easily see why we have some things on red. You need to pay attention to the red things first, immediately, I mean. It's all about the priority. So how you measure the priority, if that is something that can be harmful, maybe devastating, like having an intruder working on your resources, or maybe something that is easy to fix, so easy as applying a patch, and that is very likely to occur, like maybe an intruder gaining access to your resources by missing a patch because it knows how to enter your environment unnoticed. So this is a red flag. So if you multiply the priority, the likelihood, and the easy to fix, you're getting one by one, it is first priority. That is red for us. Immediate action, high impact. So you can compare whatever you did with your resources in Azure to the standards. And we are telling you, compared to the standards, this is a high impact. Even though you might see like harmless blue there, it is not that. It needs to be an informed decision. There's plenty of information around Azure and all of the different deployments we have for many different customers. Remember, we have over 60 different regions, and each one of the regions will contain at least one data center, but normally more than that, and hundreds of thousands of servers. So we are very used to the problems you might face. So maybe you can learn from the security center, not only see that as a colorful picture. You can grab reports from it, you can learn from it, you can back your case with that as well. For instance, one very common problem you'll see in security blade is maybe a port that is open to the public internet that shouldn't be open. For reliability, if you have, let's say, only one resource instead of two, or you're not using maybe a load balancing solution that is standard, which will offer you some redundancy as well, where you have that option. Same goes for the virtual machines or any other resource, it will tell you that. For performance, if you're underperforming because you're assigning smaller than needed size, this will tell you. For operational excellence, also, if you are dedicating some time to register your changes, to track your incidents, to maybe get your roles in place to segregate the duties, you are increasing the consistency of your deployments and maybe improving your SLAs and the time the service is up. So operational excellence will bring, in the end, some cost savings as well. For all of that, you have Azure Advisor. It is so important that if you go to the activity log, you see a category dedicated to it. How it works, it will run some policies against your resources, especially Security Center will give you information to Azure Advisor. And if you have the add-on with Sentinel, it will give you that information as well. Here you have a representation of Azure Advisor. And maybe it's too small, but you have one red flag on the top. And you have another medium. It says no validation environment enabled. This is something we covered during our deployment of session hosts. Remember, I needed to deploy a session host pool, and what I did was to select validation environment enabled or not. Here, you can see the recommendation of having one. It will give you the recommendation of create one if you don't have one, or maybe you don't have enough of production. It will give you the insights on how you should be using the technology. Another thing you can do to protect your environment is configure the device redirections. Not only for that, it can be just operational. Maybe you need to redirect a microphone and a camera or any USB devices for the remote session, but it can be also security. You have several things you can configure for redirections. Here you have the representation of the group policy objects. It is important that group policy objects will take precedence over the local policies. And it is not confined to that. You can also configure that from the Azure Virtual Desktop blade and add your different strings for the different components. You can configure that on one way or another. If you're not configuring that using the strings, you can always go to the group policy objects. And you see you have the USB redirection. There are some specifics to that, especially with COM port redirections. You need to work and see if the actual device you want to reach, it is suitable for this deployment, but here's where you start. One of the most challenging parts of dealing with virtualization and printing in a virtualized environment, it is the compatibility between the clients and the printer driver. You can use Universal Print to overcome that. It is Universal Print as a service. It runs entirely in Azure. It can be connected even to printers that doesn't support Universal Print. Use Universal Print to overcome that. And it also runs entirely in Azure. So it is a platform as a service offering that will rely on its own set of compatible drivers. It doesn't require on-premises infrastructure. You don't need to have your printer server anymore. You can use that with Microsoft Office 365 subscription. It is integrated with Azure Active Directory and supports single sign-on scenarios included. It can be deployed with non-compatible printers by using Universal Print Connector software. So that is all I have. Thank you very much. This concludes our Microsoft Azure Virtual Training Day, Azure Virtual Desktop event. Let's recap what we have seen. We went through considerations for the design of Azure Virtual Desktop infrastructure. We deployed a host pool, went through the considerations and tools available for profile management, security, image and application management, and monitoring. Thank you for attending this Microsoft Azure Virtual Training Day, Azure Virtual Desktop. Remember to check out Microsoft Learn when we offer self-paced learning paths. Happy studying!